Perfect. So it seems like we can start now. Everything should be set up. Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon to everyone watching us from Europe, and good morning to our friends in the US. My name is Zuzana Pison, and I'm a technology stream lead at the Globsec Policy Institute, a think tank based in Brussels and Bratislava. And thanks a lot to everyone joining us today. I will be leading today's discussion on growing the transatlantic digital economy with our very special guests. Joining us today are Fran Burwell, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council, Ivan Štefanec, a member of the European Parliament for the Slovak Republic, Radoslav Repa, Director of the Digital Agenda Department at the Ministry of Investments, Regional Development and Informatization of the Slovak Republic, Marta Poslat, Head of Public Policy and Government Relations for CEE at Google, and Michal Pukaluk, Director of the Digital Policy Department at the Prime Minister's Office in Poland. So a very exciting lineup, if I may say so. One note to our viewers, please feel free to use the chat section at the bottom part of the screen to ask your questions. I'm sure we'll get to them sooner or later. And before we dive into the discussion with our guests, I would like to briefly introduce the topic. As the original drivers of growth in CEE are beginning to weaken, be it traditional industries, EU funds, cheap labor, there's a general consensus that the upcoming post-pandemic recovery and the future growth model for CEE should be based on green and digital technologies. The region's transition to a digital economy is an opportunity to grow its economic future as well as political influence within the EU and in the transatlantic relationship. It is in the West Central European interest to harness the transformative potential of the digital economy and address its challenges, including data protection and privacy, digital security, misinformation, and the digital divide. A well-functioning transatlantic partnership could ensure that markets remain open and secure a level playing field for export-dependent countries of medium size, which are most CEE countries. And of course, these days we are all in great anticipation to see what will the new Biden administration bring to the EU-US relationship in the digital area. Which leads me to my very first question directed at Mr. Štefanec. Good afternoon, Mr. Štefanec. Can I ask you, how will the new Biden administration approach the digital agenda in your view?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to be with you this afternoon. So we are excited about the election in the US and about the change. I do believe it will be a positive change for transatlantic relations. All of us in Europe, we need to improve transatlantic relations. And as the answer to the expansion in Asia, particularly in China, I do believe that the right answer is the closer cooperation between EU and US. So I do believe it will be a positive change. I do believe it will be a positive change not only in order to fight pandemic, but also in terms of economical cooperation. And if we talk about economical cooperation, digital area is the crucial, particularly talking about Central Europe. Digital transformation is the principal issue, how to transform the economy. We have to invest much more into infrastructure, into human capital, into education. And from European perspective, there is huge support for that. There is the facility in the amount of 750 billion euro. It's called the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which will be basically in place as of next year. And 20% of this facility, which is predicted, which is basically with the objective to recover economy. So 20% of this facility is predicted for digital area. So I do believe it will improve also our status in digitization. And in terms of US European cooperation, I see much room for improvement in terms of common standards, particularly for artificial intelligence, particularly for antitrust relations. And I do believe there will be closer positioned also in terms of data privacy, data flows, and digital taxation. There were areas where European and American positions were different, but I do believe that with new American administration, we can also talk about these areas and we can come much closer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fran, would you mind commenting on this issue as well as someone on the other side of the Atlantic at the moment? By the way, yeah. Congratulations, big congratulations from our side.
Well, thank you very much. And greetings from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for inviting me to this. I would just like to say that although we all have big expectations of a US-European reset, if you will, a renaissance of our relationship, I think tech policy and digital policy is going to be one of those areas where there are some very serious challenges. And it's not clear to me that the Biden administration, from the little we know yet about its policy, is necessarily going to have fewer differences, although they may, than the Trump administration, but they may be more diplomatically expressed. So I think what we know about the Biden campaign is that it was run on much more emotional values, reunifying the country, and also COVID-19. There's been very little discussion about policies. And what we have seen about digital and tech is mostly aimed at the domestic audience. Enhanced broadband in rural areas, support for R&D, financial support for R&D, things like that. But coming out of this campaign, one thing that's clear, I think, is that big tech is not seen very positively by either of the parties. And I think that's going to be a real challenge. There certainly was a close relationship with the Obama administration. I expect some moving back, so we will see potentially some more regulation, but it's not at all clear what shape that's going to take. And a lot of it's focused on things like political advertising and things like that. So it's much more election focused rather than anything else. We do not have very many details, if any, about some of the big issues that are on the US-European digital agenda, such as digital services tax, the Digital Services Act, competition policy, things of that sort. We do know that there is, among the progressives in the Democratic Party, there's a real antipathy to some elements of big tech. We don't know what role that will play in a Biden administration right now. And we also don't know how this will play out in Congress, which for the moment at least remains with the House controlled by the Democrats and the Senate controlled by the Republicans. So let me just point to a couple of areas that I think may be difficult. One is timing, just basic timing. A US administration, first off, the Biden administration will not be inaugurated until January 21st. And then it will take several months for them to get their people in place. I would remind you that the Assistant Secretary for Europe in the first Obama administration finally got to his desk in May. But the EU, in the meantime, is going forward with a lot of legislation, including the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act. There may be AI legislation. So as Mr. Stefanik knows, the calendar doesn't work very well together in terms of a new administration coming in and trying to have consultations. Perhaps the most egregious, through no one's fault, example of this is digital services tax, which is going to be a challenging issue. The French are now saying that they're going to start collecting. The Trump administration has said it will retaliate with tariffs on French goods if they do collect this tax. And I'm told that that decision needs to be made. How to respond to the French that decision needs to be made before the new administration comes in. So it is something that the Trump administration will decide. So I believe that the Biden administration will rejoin the OECD effort on tax. We don't know if they reach an agreement, how a Republican Senate will look at that agreement, and will we be able to change our tax code if required. But I think there will be more positive vibes, but we'll have to get over this initial hurdle. We currently have a situation on privacy where there are real challenges to the legal underpinnings of shipping data, personal data, from Europe to the United States after the European Court of Justice decision on Schrems II. And we do see in the Biden campaign materials some support for a national privacy law in the United States. And so that's one area where we may be able to slowly make progress, because the answer to what the ECJ is criticizing us for is national privacy legislation. How that will play out in Congress, unclear. Let me just point to 5G. I think this was a relatively successful effort by the Trump administration, although sometimes very heavy-handed, to get Huawei out of European 5G networks. I expect that those types of things will continue under a Biden administration. And then I think one of the big issues, though, that we don't know how the Biden administration will respond is discrimination against US companies that may come in the form of gatekeepers, labeling them gatekeepers under the Digital Services Act, and other things, new requirements for goods and services with AI that may be in the legislation that will be proposed in 2021. So there's a lot of ifs, what ifs on both sides of the Atlantic. Let me end by just saying a few words specifically about Central Europe. I think that the Biden administration will be a real friend of Central Europe. Many of the people likely to be in the administration went through the effort to get these countries into NATO and to the European Union. And they have very fond memories of that time and of the transition to democracy. But I think that we recently did a report released at the Atlantic Council, looking at digitalization in Central Europe and looking at the opportunities for regional cooperation and also the impact of that in Brussels and how this could move these countries from being less rule takers and more rule makers, or contributing to the rulemaking at a greater extent in Brussels. And I think that's something that the countries who have always been so active in GlobSec have to think about, and whether they can cooperate more as the EU comes up with all this legislation, and whether the regulations there are reflective of their vision of how they see their economy becoming a digital economy. And I think that is something that we should be exploring, as well as a lot of different opportunities for cooperation with the United States and Europe in this area. Thank you.
And thank you very much for your comprehensive overview of the issues related to the tech agenda within the transatlantic framework. There's a lot of, let's say, bad timings, as you have mentioned, and we're hoping there will be a political will on the both sides of the Atlantic to help resolve them and find a common ground. You mentioned the role of Central Europe, and this is probably the right time to turn to a Slovak government representative, Mr. Radoslav Repa, to comment on what are the most promising opportunities lying ahead of countries such as Slovakia with regards to digital transformation, and how can CE countries such as Slovakia work with the US on the common agendas. Radoslav, can you hear me? Yes, perfect.
Yes, I can hear you well. And thank you very much for giving me the floor. Good afternoon, everybody. It has been some time I had the opportunity to speak with somebody in English, so hopefully I haven't forgotten everything. And thanks to GlobSec, I'm also glad to expand on some very important ideas we have today and the topics, which is perfectly, I think, targeted and came in the very right moment. We're after the, let's say, end of the US elections, not yet with the formal results. We're still waiting for them, but we all hope that this presidential elections will bring a change. Normally, there are only a few things in the world which can completely shake, for example, the global markets. And this, let's say, event is one of them. You know, we all live in the world which is full of completely and persisting of all megatrends. One of the megatrends is a rise of digital technologies completely changing the way, habitual way of life of our citizens and businesses. And digital transformation actually is unique notion which brings all of the changes incurred by technologies, ICT technologies, and new technologies into the life. Slovakia is a country of the Central Europe. We, along the other countries, we are trying to, of course, build our economy as a modern economy, which is prepared for any shakes in future which can come. We're industrial economy, which is one of the most open in the world, and we won't need to adapt ourselves to be competent, to be innovative, and to be still in the lead if chosen, for example, by foreign markets for them to invest in Slovakia. I would like to say that the topic of transatlantic international digital relations is very well focused. Fostering digital transformation has been a critical priority, not only for the new European Commission, but also for Slovakia here. If Europe is going to lead the next decade, it will require massive investment in education, upskilling, reskilling activities. As I already said, investment in new technologies. In addition, for example, for maintaining its very strong position in data protection rules, and so on and so forth. The question maybe is not whether Europe can rise to the challenge, but whether the political will exists to do so. We are aware that we are in a competition with other blocs, and it is not an option to stand still. Our duty is to propose standards and platforms for friendly cooperation to flourish new businesses and prosperity for all. Slovakia is doing a lot of, let's say, activities in order in fostering, for example, platform economy. We would like to get networking for all technology types and put them together. And in the future, from let's say envelope from MEP, Mr. Stefanec already mentioned this new reconstruction and resilience, let's say, facility. We would like to create a space for them to flourish, to rise, and to grow. So we're just on the verge of transition. This transition should be digital. There is no doubt for that, and I look forward to having a fruitful debate today.
Thank you very much, Radoslav. I would like to turn to Michal Pokaluk now to give us the perspective from our neighboring country, Poland, which is obviously a much bigger market, and maybe comment on what are the most promising opportunities lying ahead of Poland with regards to digital transformation, and maybe you could point out also the differences with Slovakia and react to Radoslav's contribution.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me to this panel. Yes, the main areas of focus, I think, have already been mentioned during this conversation and during this panel already. The question was on opportunities, and I think many countries across Europe have the same opportunities. What they don't have in common is potential, of course, and opportunities being the same. I mean, we've been hearing those buzzwords for some time now, which is IoT, artificial intelligence, cloud services, digital services. These are kind of convergent across Europe, I guess. And I think the real game changer right now for European countries is actually the ability to do things together. And the European Commission has been very vocal and very busy on legislation. And my feeling is that we have all the necessary legislation already on the table. And what the Commission right now is saying is pretty much, okay, so you have the legislation, please sit at the table and cooperate. This is what Central Europe doesn't do, actually, and this is the biggest chunk of this picture that is actually lacking. And let me give an example. Some time ago, Poland put forward this project on digital highway infrastructure that would be part of 3 Cities initiative, as you may know. transportation and energy have been two chunks of Three Seas initiative that have been around for some time, and digital cooperation is the missing link here. This is a project that Poland put forward within the Three Seas framework, and just 2 months ago, maybe we reached out to other Three Seas countries, and we put together this draft MOU. We got the response that was quite weak and meager, I would say. And of course, I sympathize with those who responded to us saying that maybe this is not the right time because the pandemic saw to it that there are priorities that are shifted very much, and the governments are busy doing other things than simply big infrastructure projects. But we have to remember that the pandemic, dreadful as it is, there's no question about that, it also allowed some of the countries, some of the administrations to simply leapfrog with digital affairs, and in the sense that not only we could see pretty much overnight how important digital transformation is. That's one thing, but secondly, it also, I would say, the pandemic, it sort of gave us momentum to do things together, and this is just one of the examples that just came to my mind. I mean, this Three Seas digital highway project. I would say that maybe this is the right time that we do these kind of projects, not regardless of the pandemic, but just because of the pandemic, in order to give the necessary leverage to the business. Of course, we have money to do that, and would like to pick up what Mr. Stefanik said about money. Of course, we have a lot of money, and we have recovery funds, Connecting Europe Facility, React-EU, Digital Euro. So the money is there, and what is not there is this culture of cooperation, and that we have to go beyond our borders and be cooperative. It's true not just for Europe, but also transatlantic. And I guess this is the big takeaway that I'd like to leave you with, that of course economies become interconnected, but the real added value is with us working, doing things that we can, reach out and touch, something tangible. Just what we should do, and of course, going transatlantic, and I'm still sticking to this example that the digital highway project. That, by the way, we're doing a feasibility study for that, and we'll be getting back to member states with some more information how we should go about this. So please stay tuned for that. And so once we're transatlantic, I think one of the biggest contributions that the US can make is in cybersecurity standards. This is where we need close cooperation with the US. Last year, Poland and the US signed a declaration to commonly address cybersecurity technical challenges in 5G. Of course, we would very much like to see this transatlantic partnership go a bit further and cover R&D. So cybersecurity standards and having the US involved in here would be working to this capacity building of the process. Another thing is, I would say, is high quality data. And I'm not talking about personal data, I'm talking about industrial data. Poland has been has been campaigning and making the case for having data accessed and reused and being supplied with for some time now, at least from 2016. We had this idea of trusted data spaces across the EU. I'm very glad to see tomorrow will mark the day when the European Commission will come with a Data Governance Act, and I'm personally quite happy to see many of the ideas that we had on the table 4 years ago are reflected in the draft document that is going to be out tomorrow. On roadblocks, I think one of the biggest is disinformation. Maybe two years back, I wouldn't say that is this much of a problem. I think this is a systemic problem right now. Because, well, it's too much at stake. We have 5G technology that is being attacked by those who distribute disinformation on how harmful it is. On people's health. Of course, I think just pure education will not be enough here. We did a lot of research as Poland. There's this white book that we put together. Recently, we submitted to the European Commission a joint initiative, a letter counteracting the spread of disinformation related to 5G networks, urging the Commission to act. Slovakia was among the member states endorsing this project, which we're very grateful for. Of course, Digital Services Act was mentioned here, and DMA also. That's a big part of transatlantic relations. I don't really think there will be any shift in the approach that the US has so far had towards that. It's true, Mrs. Burwell said about the timing, which can be challenging, but that DSA thing has been around at least for 1 year now, and I think Poland and many member states in Europe, in the EU, they have done a lot to first get to know what we think about that and consult heavily across other member states and our American partners, including big platforms. So I think that there is everybody, I think, involved in the topic, I think they have the right feel of the room where the DSA should and will go. And I think that whatever's going to be part of this will not come as a surprise to platforms and to experts across Europe. But what I'd like to point out here is that maybe some sort of strategic regulatory dialogue has been missing between Europe and the US. This is what we didn't have. Many countries did that on their own accord. Poland has been cooperating with Facebook on this. I'm not sure if you are aware of that. Poland and Facebook have worked out this contact point, a sort of a second instance that you can use if your post is blocked. And if you file a complaint to Facebook and Facebook said no, then you can use an instrument, a website sitting on government servers to file a second instance complaint and see your content unblocked, if this is legal, of course. And we've had more than 3,000 cases since 2018, and in maybe 700 cases, it was, I mean, Facebook said, okay, we made a mistake, and that was unblocked. So we're experimenting, and we have been experimenting, and Poland has been experimenting with these kind of instruments, with big platforms. But I think this should have been part of a bigger picture, leading by the this is something we didn't have. Of course, yes, the gatekeepers is well, I think a topic where we can where we can see some tensions between Europe, Poland, and maybe the US. But I'm quite optimistic about the outcome because after all, we have corresponding political systems. I think we share Europe and the US. We share the same values, which is freedom of speech, right to privacy, free media. We understand that this is the citizen and the user that has to be in the heart of what we do. So just to wrap it up, I don't think any major change in American politics towards Europe, especially in the area of digital services. But I'm being quite optimistic about where we should go. Just based on the values we all share. So that would be an announcement.
Thank you very much, Michal, on ending your inputs on this optimistic note. I would now like to circle back to Mr. Ivan Štefanec and ask him on a more like a helicopter perspective on the CE region as such, and how can the region help shape the digital agenda in the EU?
Well, yeah, thank you very much for this question. Central European region is definitely a region with a high potential, particularly in digitization, because of human capital. I think the most important asset of Central European region is the human capital. We've got also in Central Europe relatively good infrastructure. However, it's also room for improvement. We can improve infrastructure in comparison with other European countries. We are somewhere like on average level. So also, as we talked that we have a lot of money, there will be massive investments, and it will be question mark how to spend it. So I do believe that investments into infrastructure would be very, very useful. Another point for investments would be investments into education, because of educational system is still not the best one. However, people are very creative, and human capital, as I've mentioned, is the potential, is very high potential for development in Central Europe. What we've got now, we've got a lot of so-called mass production, like automotive industry, which is very strong in Central Europe. And this industry is also changing. I think digital transformation is the best way how to use this momentum and how to transform a mass production into digital industry. We have to understand also that majority of jobs in Central Europe is created by small and medium entrepreneurs. Roughly 2/3 of jobs in private sectors have been created by small entrepreneurs. Therefore, we have to support this business environment. It's the challenge also to improve business environment for small entrepreneurs in order to cut red tape, to improve, let's say, tax and administrative costs for them, and also to improve access to finance. That's probably one of the major differences now between Central Europe and the United States, this access to capital, because still we don't have developed capital market in Europe, and particularly not in Central Europe. So the work on so-called capital market union on the European level would be very, very useful for Central European countries. And last remark I'd like to mention also regarding taxation, because I'm very much agree with many remarks which were made by my previous speakers, particularly by the need for cooperation and regulatory dialogue. But in terms of taxation, we have to understand that in Europe we have a competence on national level. So if we talk about digital taxation in France, it is really the decision made by the French government and not by European institutions. I have to say on the European level, there is a lot of discussion about taxation policy, about also new European budget, but so far it is the taxation decision making on the national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefanis. I have one more question for you, since it's very much related, and that regards the EU technological sovereignty, and more specifically the dichotomy of understanding the digital sovereignty. On the one hand, it can be understood as Europe's ability to act independently in a digital world. However, critics point out that this strategy might disregard the importance of open markets and value of long-term contribution of existing cooperation with trusted non-EU partners and global playing field for export or dependent countries of medium size, which are most CEE countries. So what is your view on this dichotomy, and how should we as Slovakia or wider CEE region approach it?
I do believe that we have to approach it from the point of view to strengthen our digital skills, our digital position, but not really to be separated. I think if we talk about digital sovereignty, it does not mean that we should be separated. Just the contrary, we have to cooperate much more with other world, particularly with democratic countries. Therefore, I think the cooperation between EU and US is necessary in this case. If we talk about the digital area and strengthening these digital issues, I think we talk about so-called European cloud. We talk about a common approach on digital infrastructure, which we have to improve. And basically, we talk here about 5G networks and about improving connectivity. We talk also from a technical point of view about issues like semiconductor industry, because only 10% of semiconductors are produced in the European Union in comparison with United States, where there is almost half of world production and the rest is in Asia. So we would like to strengthen also position of digital industry by producing more products and semi-products in the European Union. So infrastructure production and also putting more investments into digital area, but at the same time to cooperate with other world, particularly with US, and cooperate on the common standards. Because if we have new fascinating areas like artificial intelligence, for instance, we have to talk about how to set up new standards which will influence our life in the future. And I do believe we can cooperate much closer in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the word to Marta Postat from Google to provide us with a private sector perspective on the issues of digital transformation in the CE, and how can we maintain the momentum for the wider region to transform in the digital area.
Thank you for this question. Thank you for having me. Perhaps I'm just going to start with adding a little bit to the transatlantic context, as we are in a very special week post election, and I think we should all hope that 2021 will bring re-energizement of the transatlantic relationship that I think has been deeply missed in the past few years, and especially when it comes to discussing technology. And at Google, we've always seen a very specific role Central and Eastern Europe has been playing in that debate. And this is widely recognized. And we hope this role will continue, whatever the next year will bring. And I feel that in the past few months there has been one very particular proposal coming from the Commission side, from Commissioner Hogan, while he was still in office, who suggested an establishment of EU-US Trade and Technology Council. And this is something that I think rings the bell for many stakeholders. Definitely should be government and institutions led, but I think many stakeholders on the market are really looking forward to the dialogue. Like many of my predecessors in this discussion said, we do share values, we do share appreciation of democratic standards between our continents. And most importantly, the transatlantic cooperation is the strongest economic partnership in the world and in history. Currently sustains 16 million jobs, and this is something we should keep in the back of our mind, as recently that has not always been the top of the agenda. And when it comes to maintaining the momentum, I think it's impossible to talk today outside the context of the past few months and the context of the pandemic. And needless to say that digitalization has played a vital role in maintaining social and economic activity in CE as in other parts of the world, and it's and this role is likely to continue going forward. A recent McKinsey study that was covering the past 5 months of the pandemic proved that the digital economy has been growing twice as fast than in the last 2 years. So, bearing in mind all the hardship and challenges that have been with us in the recent times, but looking ahead, this is something that should be on top of mind of policymakers, but also companies like ours, in order to think about how we can build of what was an unintended consequence of the pandemic. And what Google is specifically looking into in CE region is digital upskilling and economic recovery at the moment. We want to contribute to a smooth recovery, especially for SMEs, as possible across CE, including Slovakia, including Poland. We do propose partnerships to help either specific sectors or specific groups of companies to go through the crisis with the use of digital tools, through either changing, maybe adjusting the nature of their businesses to better operate online, or to acquire specific skills by the workforce to have a smoother recovery. The past few months have seen 12 million of new users in Central and Eastern Europe. This is a huge number, and it is estimated that what happened in the first 4 months of the pandemic is what was expected and forecasted as the development of the digital ecosystem in the next 4 years. So, and this is also true for our region. So, first week answer to your question, definitely looking very closely and monitoring at the consequences of the pandemic and what happened in the digitalization realm, making sure, in line with what is European Commission and other European institutions are proposing at the moment, making sure that the recovery will be in line with digital development and with sustainability. And here is again another role that US tech companies could and should play. We really see that as an opportunity to do things together. And the ambitious plan of the Commission, for example, for sustainability, could greatly benefit from the technology that we developed, that we could contribute to. And I think it's also worth remembering that we're not just American companies. We do provide, except for investing in Europe, our existence here is based on partnerships and working with European entrepreneurs. Then there is, of course, the regulatory horizon that we've been, that many of the panelists have been discussing today. And I think what's really important to remember is that we are at a time when consumers and enterprises and citizens ask for more and not less from technology, and that should be kept in mind when regulating. There had been a number of regulatory proposals before the pandemic started, and I think it's worth an effort to see how they play out. Like, what did the pandemic show us in terms of regulatory solutions? Last but not least, and this is something that Google is not taking for granted, with that change, with people expecting more, there will be also more expectations from business community to be part of the solution, but also to provide transparency, to provide more confidence into using the tools that people suddenly started using en masse. So these are the challenges that I'm sure will be shared in public-private conversations going forward, including regulatory. But I also think that they are currently positioned in a new light as opposed to what we saw before the pandemic started.
Thank you very much, Marta. I have one more question for you related to regulation. I mean, it is no secret that large global platforms like Google are going to be significantly influenced by the upcoming EU regulation in the digital sector, including but not limited to the Digital Services Act package. And from your perspective, how to meet an equilibrium between regulation and open markets?
So that takes me to what I said before. I think much of this equilibrium will be attributed to the future trade relationship between the EU and the US, and I think that this is an umbrella above many aspects of the regulations that you just mentioned. So here is where I would see a role of politicians to play and to find a common understanding, and that's the kind of a new opening or a restart that I had in mind in the first part of my contribution to this panel. Secondly, indeed, this is currently a big challenge, how to balance many of those values. I think what should be on the top of our minds in terms of the transatlantic definition of the trade relationship is that most likely strategic interdependence, as we'd like to call it, is most probably of more benefit to European and American citizens than the rhetorics of, for example, digital sovereignty, that as such is a very closed term, and we're definitely we would be definitely more supportive to seeking the ways through which we can be strategically interdependent as two ecosystems, and the way this should be translating to regulation, I think is just a matter of a very in-depth and careful discussion in order to make sure that all the benefits that the digital economy is carrying will not be distorted in any way, or that the options will not be limited. And as I said, I think especially at the time of economic recovery, that it will be so heavily dependent on the digital, that should be also a priority for us as actors who are participating in this debate, but also policymakers who are at the end of the day putting those proposals together. This will be certainly a very challenging next months and years until for example, Digital Services Act get into final shape. But this is definitely the debate worth having. All actors across the spectrum agree that this discussion needs to take place, and I feel that now that we're all entering those discussions, Google submitted our position just weeks ago. I think it's very important to enter open-minded and to take many of the factors that I just mentioned into account. But overall, looking forward to being part of this process.
Thank you very much. I will now turn to the questions from the audience, which keep coming. So there's one question from Geoffrey Carliner, which is, how does competition from China in setting standards affect EU-US cooperation on issues like privacy, security, disinformation on social media? So maybe this could be a good question for Fran, if you feel comfortable answering it.
Sure, absolutely. I think that we do need to keep in mind, even as we have arguments in the future, and I'm sure that we will, between the US and the EU, we do need to keep in mind that we are not the only players. And in fact, right now, I think we stand kind of on the edge of determining which way the global digital economy will develop over the next 10 years or so. And that is exactly, will the US and the EU get together and create standards, create ways of doing things that will buttress an open economy, a more market-driven economy with protections for citizens, obviously. Or is it one that will be more divided, with China playing an even bigger role? And I think China's, and I would say this about Russia as well, but they're less influential, their view of how the internet should be run and who it should benefit is more aimed at the state and the authority of the state, rather than protecting the privacy and the opportunities of individual citizens. So what we should be looking at is things like some of the traditional trade discussions that the US and the EU have had about WTO rules on state subsidies and tech transfer that are affected by China. Those are things we should be pursuing because they also affect this whole tech dimension. I think this creating standards in cybersecurity and AI, joint standards together, will help very much. And I think thinking about together about how to keep our systems resilient, both the infrastructure and also, if there's a way to kind of express this, to keep social media more resilient than it has been to fake news and other things of that sort. So I think that while there are challenges facing the US and the EU, as we try to figure out how to make our digital economy mesh together, we need to keep in mind that it's not just us, and that we really are trying to figure out what the global digital economy will look like. On that, I just wanted to underscore the discussion about a lack of a strategic regulatory dialogue between the United States and the EU. And while I would not necessarily favor a trade and tech council because I don't want these issues enmeshed with Boeing Airbus, I do think we really need to have some kind of strategic level, regular, recurring dialogue, kind of like the Energy Council has been perhaps, between the United States and the EU, in part because of exactly what your questioner raised.
Mr. Stefanec, would you like to also comment on the issue of China?
Yes, with pleasure. Let me highlight that I fully agree with previous answer. Just to build on that, I can provide you with the fact that US and Europe together create half of world trade. If we are together, we are in position to set up standards and others will just copy them. If not, we are threatened by a situation that in future Chinese will set up standards which we will be forced to take. And this is not only in production, it is also in services, particularly in digital services. Now in European Union, we have highest protection of consumer. US is very close. In European Union, we have the highest protection of privacy with GDPR. US is also very close. That's the field where we have to cooperate. And as the artificial intelligence is coming, we have to talk about the new ways how to set up the standards. And if we are able to cooperate, if we are able to listen each other, I'm positive for future, and I'm positive that we are able to do so. Thank you.
One more question from our viewers, from Andrei Skolkai. He's asking whether there's something in the US similar to the e-commerce directive or upcoming DSA. I think he's referring to the section 230. So maybe Fran would be comfortable answering that.
Yes, there is section 230, which does protect those who have platforms who don't have necessarily control over what their users are putting up. And I do think that we're seeing kind of a reevaluation of that. And but I think that it's very unclear whether there will be any real move to affect that in the next administration. I think that this is, the US discussion and the European discussions are kind of in different places. And I think the US inclination generally is to look at existing rules and to see if they are sufficient for this new economy, rather than simply to come up with new rules about this economy. So I think we will continue to see some disjuncture between the US and the EU on this. I think a lot of what is going to happen, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what is going to happen vis-a-vis that type of regulation in the United States over the next few years, simply because of the transition, and because we continue to have, at least for the moment, divided Congress.
Thank you very much. There's another question coming from Jessie Kelly. She's asking, where do you see the biggest opportunities for collaboration with the Pacific region, including Australia, in the digital economy, I believe? Is there someone comfortable with answering that question?
Well, potentially there is the room for cooperation also in production, in terms of, for example, semiconductor production, but also in terms of digital services. There are plenty of new ideas which can be developed. So still, we can cooperate even with this region. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question for Google specifically from Andrei Skolkai, so for Marta. How does Google, or Alphabet specifically, respond to criticism of Krekinski regarding suggested mutual contract for legacy media concerning sharing profits and costs?
So on this front, we have been very clear in the language we've been using around the programs that we're pursuing, and we're currently looking into that particular commentary. So I would prefer to step aside from this particular one, but I do believe that Google has a strong story to share with the publishing ecosystem. Throughout the whole journey of this heightened debate, we've been proving and showing our commitment to finding ways to address publishers' concerns, and we're still learning and listening to feedback, and presume that this is not the end of the discussion. So I think that's where I would leave this one.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're running out of time, but thank you very much to all our speakers for the amazing, insightful discussion. There will be a summary of the webinar and a post report as a follow-up after this webinar. Thank you very much to our viewers for watching it as well, and hopefully see you again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.